the run-up to the UK elections, OneClimate's director Anuradha Vittachi met up with Simon Hughes, the Liberal Democrats' shadow on climate change and energy and a long-time environmental campaigner.
So, Simon, thank you very much at this very, very busy time, very exciting time, fitting us in.
A pleasure.
So, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, you seem to have very, very ambitious targets, and you want to hit these ambitious targets for clean electricity and so on without nuclear. And even activists like George Monbiot or Mark Linus, they feel, not only the traditionalists feel this is impossible. So, how are you going to manage this?
Well, the answer is that nuclear actually produces very little reduction in emissions and very small contribution to the power mix, and very slowly. If we started now building the new fleet of nuclear power stations, on the earliest projections they would be on stream in 2015, 16, probably 17, the very earliest, most likely really in the mid next decade. We need the energy before that. But also, if we do a set of other things, then we can both give ourselves the domestically produced energy we need and the sources of other. And just very briefly, they're these. We have oil and gas still in the North Sea. We have coal, which is in abundance, although it must be clean coal in the future. And we have increasingly imported gas, liquid petroleum gas, coming both into the west coast and to the east coast. We are clear there is a huge opportunity for energy efficiency. I mean, you will know the figures as well as I do. 1 in 100 British homes, according to government last year, was energy efficient. We are probably the least energy efficient country in Western Europe in terms of properties and business premises and so on. So energy efficiency can buy us probably a stabilisation of the use. I'm not pretending it'll bring down the use, but we can probably hold the energy consumption. And for the rest, we're clear we have to take renewables and use them as only Britain can, because we have such a wonderful, wonderful resource. We have onshore wind, controversial, but plenty of it. We have offshore wind, more expensive than onshore, but with fantastic opportunities, particularly on the east coast of Scotland and England. And we've just announced a policy that would, in the first year after the government, have 7 or 8 ports making those large turbines close to where they'd be used. We've just had the announcement from the Crown Estates that the Pentland Firth can be developed for tidal power across the north of Scotland. There's a figure that suggests we might be able to get a third of our energy from that source alone. And then there's the Bristol Channel and the Severn Estuary. And then there are the other forms, the hot rocks and the anaerobic digestion, all those things. So we're clear we need to have more ambitious renewable energy targets coupled with increased energy efficiency and other sources. And the last thing, we want not to be an island politically or in energy terms. We want to be part of the European continent, and that means that we would be able and willing and be keen to have a much more efficient grid in Europe that allows us to use the solar power from the Mediterranean, the hydroelectric power from Norway, as well as our own. So you don't have the problem of intermittency of supply that comes only from wind. So we think we can do it. And then there's an upside. We're going to have a difficult few years economically. We know we've had an environmental
going to cost rather a lot.
We've had an environmental crisis and an economic crisis. Nuclear power costs a lot of money. And all the evidence, both of Britain in its previous generation, of the States now, where they are developing new nuclear, Finland, which is several years behind with its nuclear power station, is that the public purse has to come to the rescue all the time. It is going to be no cheaper to develop nuclear power than to develop renewables. Yes, renewables will need subsidy, but to pretend that nuclear power won't is a delusion. And we think it's expensive, it doesn't contribute much, is dangerous, imports and moves around dangerous materials, and nobody knows how safely to dispose of the waste. So we have lots of good grounds for saying no to nuclear, concentrate on the others. We believe we can deliver.
But you mentioned the economic crisis. I mean, you're comparing one expensive thing with another expensive thing. Are there going to be much harder economic realities that will emerge after the election? Because so far the kinds of black holes that people are talking about are actually very tiny black holes. I mean, once we really know the facts, mightn't these black holes be considerably larger?
We're very clear that we have a huge, huge economic deficit. You know the figures for this year, 167 billion or thereabouts. And we have gone honestly into this election saying we have a costed programme for next year, which is not about cuts in this financial year. It's about moving things from non-priority subject areas to priority areas. But then we believe there will have to be major savings. We have set out some of them. You're right, they don't meet the total likely savings package, and the Institute of Fiscal Studies recently gave its comparable report, or it gave us in many ways best marks for being more honest and identifying more savings than either of the other parties, who rely a lot on waste and rather generalised things, which all governments always put in their list. Nobody has identified the total picture. We've identified, we think, more than anybody else. We've also identified the process for making the decisions, but we will be sitting in 3 months' time in this country working out a very large set of cuts, and we think that of those, the nuclear budget and the allocation of, as yet relatively small money, but allocation of public money is a saving we can rightfully make.
Given that the amount of scepticism there is in the Conservatives, within their own cabinet even, and certainly among their members, you know, will you, for example, if they come into power, will you be able to work with them adequately? Will you believe that they'll be able to support you, or whether they'll even want to support you?
We try to deal honestly with that. I've been a campaigner on environmental issues all my political life and before, and most of my party joined the party because they know we're a green and environmental campaigning party, and we're an internationalist party, and the Liberal Party before that until 1988 was the same. The Labour Party has had some green environmentalist people in it, and in the last couple of years the Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, has been very good at arguing the case. I don't have any criticism. The government has failed many of its targets, which I would criticise, but he personally has been very committed. The Tory party has also tried to make itself at the top much greener, but all the figures show the candidates, the views of the people standing for election, have a majority of people who don't believe that climate change is caused by human activity. It's extraordinary given the science. So the answer to your question is that if there is a Conservative government, we are very troubled by what will happen, because we don't think the enlightened will be able to pull the unenlightened with them. If there is a Labour government, then we think they get the message much better. If we're in government, we are confident we would be very sound on the science and the international remedies needed. And if there's a balanced parliament, it for us will be a big issue. Energy and environmental climate change policy will be a very big issue, not just at home, but abroad, including the sorts of money you'd need to give internationally for adaptation and mitigation.